Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach, and today we have with us Michael Gale, who is a Wall Street Journal bestselling author of The Digital Helix. Michael, welcome to the program.
Hey, it's great to be here. We're going to have a fun conversation today, so let's go.
Yeah, I love talking about innovation and what's around the corner and what's happening right now and AI and automations and all of that, and that's the world that you live in. Give us a little bit of a background of yourself and what led you to this best-selling book called Digital Helix.
Yeah, great question. So I think the reality is 5-6 years ago when we started the research for the book, we recognized that there were really enormous undercurrents of waves of change, not just the typical this new product, that new technology, but really a sort of movement about thinking very differently about business, government, innovation. Doesn't matter if you're a huge organization or small, digital has become, if you're good at it, a platform for how you do business. And what we recognized was there was this desperate need to chase that golden fleece of spend more money, invest more in technology. But a lot of the success that we were able to track in the research and the DNA of what that success looked like really evolved around thinking, designing, and acting differently so that your business did become a digital platform, not just a business that uses technology. So I'm lucky to be a top 10 AI influencer in the world. And as all these technologies happen, cloud, AI, so on and so forth, it's too easy to fall into the tendency to digitally wrap what you're doing, whereas what you should be doing is digitally reinventing. And the book is really about what does it take to successfully digitally reinvent your business.
Good. So I want to dive into that, but I thought of a question while you were describing that about your research. Tell me just a little bit about how you conducted the research, what that looked like. Was that on-site appointment with companies and seeing what they do? Was it working with universities? I always am intrigued with how research gets done for these really deep books.
Yeah, it's a great question. So we took sort of three tranches to it. The first of all, we actually went out and created or aggregated or worked through about 1,000 case studies because I think, pure quantitative or pure qualitative is just too extreme. So it's a huge book of them. I'm looking at them now, literally case studies from everywhere around the world about how organizations were talking about digital transformation, their own and the industries. We then actually went off and spent, probably 3,000 plus hours sitting with organizations, whether or not they were the GSA, government purchasing agency, all the way down to Hallmark, and just watching what they were doing in meetings and style and language and process over time. And that took, 3+ years to do. And the third thing is we actually did some really innovative primary research where we talked to, 1,300 organizations about empirically sort of defining and measuring and explaining what they had done. And when you glue these things together, 1,000 case studies, 3,000 hours on site, and sort of 1,300 really deep interviews, what we're able to extract was a particular pattern of the DNA of success that said there were like 7, pretty key components that drive success. And we had, the color commentary from the case studies and the sort of witness, exploration to the work, as well as the quantitative research you could look up for sort of empirical strength. And I think, we deliberately did the book the year before the Helix, the sort of Crick and Watson book, because what we realized was that a lot of people understand what digital means. They find it very difficult to put it into practice in a meaningful way. So we wanted the book to be part of that journey to sort of meaningful installation of a digital platform.
Yeah. When you mentioned case studies, I know we're going to talk a little bit about some of the case studies and successes, but I always like to think from different perspectives, maybe a contrarian view. So can you think of a case study that you worked on that really was not successful, where maybe someone attempted to implement digital and transformation and it just kind of flopped? And don't mention names or companies, but were you able to see some of those? Because I feel like many times we can learn from other people's mistakes.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So I'll give you a simple frame. So last year, after the book came out, we thought, well, let's start to size this stuff up. And we found that about and I'll take the big corporation end of the market, it's a little easier to research, but only about 28% of really major corporations have been getting this right. And imagine you've got $100 on the table. That 28, organizations, let's say about 100, are sucking up about 72 of all those $100 on the table because they're just really, really, really good at it. And then that means that the remaining, $28 on the table are being really peanut butter spread across 72. And the reason why I give you that answer is I don't think we see horrendous failure in places because the technology in the market is so right. You should get something positive. But I think failure in this area is a lack of magnitude of change. I'll give you two examples of it. So we looked at two companies in the insurance industry, which is, something we all have to buy. Yeah. Both relatively doing the same things. One organization was getting an effective ROI of about $10 to $12 for every $1 they put in, and that's very easily measured. And the other organization was getting probably about $1.10 back for everything done. And I think that when you look at what they were both doing in a similar industry, in a style, failure there was really a failure of imagination and a failure of working practices, not a failure in the technologies they were buying or their desire. And I think it's when we look at this DNA, it's sort of the difference between, highly evolved species and not so highly evolved species. It just takes a few things not to work for it to go horribly wrong. And we've written a lot of this stuff about human capital. We've written a lot of this about whole new styles of understanding data, when you keep it, when you throw it away, when you use it, when you change it. And if I look at those two organizations as sort of, two twins, the failing organization really attempted to digitally wrap what they were doing, but the successful organization truly reinstalled the way it thought, designed an act to do it. And it's an interesting comparison because these are two very large insurance businesses.
Yeah, I think that sometimes we can even remove the label of failure and just kind of say, there's a huge spectrum of success. It's just you got to get in the game and jump and be all in, and then you can maybe dial in your level of success. So I think that's a really super response.
Yeah, you can dial to some extent, but I think the more we've built this algorithm, the more you recognize, there are 21 sort of big variables. You've got to get at least 18 of those right. At a deep level. And what we found is that organizations that can't get past that, let's say, really 17 thresholds, 17 of the 21, they're just not going to succeed. It doesn't matter how much intent goes in there. They just can't get into what I call a medal status. They can't get on the plinth that says you come first, second, and third. And it's just as complicated. And I think this is going to induce a have and have not world. There's really distinctive going forward. I mean, we've seen it in retail. I think we're going to see it in transportation. We're going to see it in oil and energy. We're going to see it in financial services. There's going to be a very small group of haves that get this right and a very large group of have-not that almost feel the old world very quickly.
So let's kind of take a step back and lay a foundation of just a simple, what do you say digital transformation is, in a nice, easy, clear to understand way? And then why is this now so increasingly vital for today?
Yeah, great question. So I think there's a very simple definition of a digital transformation that says you are making your business a digital platform, and that everything you do, employee, customer, sales, marketing, partner, production, delivery, is all fundamentally orientated around a digital-first experience. Even how you manage accounting, expenses, 24/7 chatbots. And in fact, the real uniqueness here is almost like saying to a CEO, close your eyes, fall backwards, and the new digital world will take care of you. Because we're not, as an entrepreneur, honestly, even handling silly things like calendaring and meetings, or a huge corporation handling really complicated supply chain. The way the market works now is you can pay as you go. Small competitors have an instant capability against you because the technology is available and size is not an issue anymore. And I think thirdly, more importantly, the demographic shift in the way we all think, as young kids or as adults, is where do I go first to get this digitally means you have to have a whole new way of thinking about sales, marketing, brand presence that's just radically different than anything that, frankly, the business schools still struggle to teach with. And I think that the reason why it's now is shift in economics, shift in technology, shift in demographics, the planet is basically really flat. So if you don't have a flat view of how to connect with it, it's super difficult to keep staff, work with partners, and sell to customers.
You bring up something interesting when you mentioned the education field where, AI is really not being taught. And if you really want to point a finger, maybe you could make the point that the educational institutions are not preparing students coming out of business schools, whether undergrad or grad, to really participate fully into this digital transformation world that we are in and will continue to be in. Have you found that as well?
I would scream yes. And it's unfair to maybe blame them fully, because it's very difficult to teach for a future of seismic change based on a syllabus of relatively consistent predictability. I go Michael Porter, Five Forces, you look at TQM. These have been established nomenclatures for postgraduate and even undergraduate education going forward. And most of the academics teaching now have not been at the forefront of the digital revolution in the preceding 5 to 10 years. So it's very difficult for them to teach and to enable success, because they're teaching the wars of the past, not the wars of the future. And I think that's true of society generally. But I do believe there's increasing questions about whether or not our whole higher education system is adequately qualifying people to think through the process of what it takes to be successful in a flat world.
If you think about that in relation to competitive advantage, if a corporation is fully dialed into the digital transformation, that can be one of their competitive advantages. And if you think about it from the school institution point of view, if they start offering and spotlighting AI, design thinking, those kinds of things into their curriculum, their school then could have a competitive advantage against other schools, and then trickle it down to the student coming out of a business school with these kinds of courses. They have a competitive advantage in the job market of getting a position where their education now is focused on some of these things, whereas their colleagues vying for the job might just have the generic, 4 Ps and all the normal things that came out of their typical graduate degree.
Completely agree. In fact, that's why I think you're seeing 2 major shifts in the educational market. One is the sort of online postgraduate model is perceived as being really valuable because just the volume of learning doesn't require a classroom, particularly the teacher teaching old world tricks for a new world game. And second, I think you're going to see a shift in the value proposition of a number of these institutions. Because the other thing to think about, and we learned this in the research last year, is that really successful digitally transforming corporations, that 20%, invest 3 times more in terms of training, range, depth, so on for their staff than the 72% of organizations that are not thriving. So there's clearly a correlation between how much time and energy you spend training people and what the net positive economic returns you get are. So I think this issue of education for life, or educating yourself for a life, is going to be an increasingly important part of what these MBA or postgraduate qualifications need to offer, which is, can you enter a further learning curve, not just a post-undergraduate learning moment?
Yep. That leads right into the next point I wanted to make, which is you have said that research shows only 6% of corporate leaders say they're dedicated to the idea of digital business based on AI, right? But 96% of corporations fully expect to be transformed in under 3 years. So how can 96% say we're going to be ready and 6% say they're dedicated? There's some big gap there, right?
Well, there are a number of gaps. I think, first of all, we've often rapped with technology. I'll get PCs for my people. I'll go in the cloud, I'll digitally transform. AI is just another extension of that discourse. And again, that 6% suck up like 22% of all the returns, because installing this technology and the mindset and organizations around it just gives you outrageous capability. And it's not just the whole Uber, Google, Amazon type model, but the vast array of businesses are installing AI-led chatbots for customer service or AI-led analytics on dynamic resource allocation, are making huge economic strides because they understand the power of that data and the power of that construct to change the way they think about their business. And the problem is, I think, and it's another very concerning statement, in organizations that are really successful, the leaders spend on average 17 and a half hours a week on that subject of AI or digital transformation. In organizations making the same statement but not organizing for success, the leaders spend on average 3.5 hours. And if you can't spend the personal time, if you can't dedicate the focus to change, you shouldn't expect the net present results gained by the minority.
Yeah. It's kind of like, it makes me think of wishful thinking, oh yeah, 96 will be there, and then they won't. And kind of like Stephen Covey was known to say, begin with the end in mind. So at least they're beginning with the end in mind, but there's a big old gap in their implementation of the steps needed to get there.
Oh, perfectly put. Absolutely elegantly stated.
Thank you. Hey, let's just throw out another fact. I saw an article that you wrote up on your website, and this fact jumped out at me. 54% of organizations are still focused on project level digital transformation. And the thing that made me think of this is that could be very scary, in the sense that if they're focused on project level, that means that other areas of the business are not focused on digital transformation. And now it's almost like having a Ferrari engine in a Volkswagen Beetle from the 1970s, and it's just not going to be firing on all cylinders.
That's a great analogy. So there was a Spanish car company that attempted to put a Porsche engine inside the car. Never worked very, very well. It's a great analogy. And part of the problem, I think, is that there's this schism between recognizing the outside world is changing and how you need to change, and saying, yeah, the outside world's changing, I'll just try and buy my way through it. And I think the thing we found is that organizations where leaders really genuinely lead in day to day just have a higher chance of success because they're paying attention to what I call these 7 drivers of external change. And I think thinking about literally sitting in a room with your executive team, and on one wall, cover it with white paper, whatever, put white. What are the things in the market that are changing? And are we paying attention to them? Are we leveraging them? Because when we did the research, we found if you were paying attention to 6 or the 7 of these big drivers and you were really leveraging them, your chance of success went up 400%. I think the second thing you've got to say is, how do we design for success in this whole new world? Another wall. How do we change the way we think, design, and act? And then on the far right wall, or the final wall, before you come in on the door, you say, look, what are we going to have to stop? What are we going to have to start? What are we going to have to do differently? What do we continue? And actually, that is the moment. If you get in that war room and you see those 3 things happen, it's that moment where you recognize you've radically increased your chances of success. Just buying AI, just getting onto the cloud, just putting in a cyber-secure level isn't going to get you there without a radical rethink of how you do a business. And that's the problem, that most leaders, they're caught down with the grind of the day, they're caught down with a history of, I've done this for 40 years, I'm going to keep doing it the same way. It's why, over half the leaders we talked to said to us they were more concerned about startups in their sector than established players they've been competing with for decades.
So here's a question about that statement right there. It made me think of the company Blockbuster. Do you feel, and they went under for something that I would say they did, that we would not necessarily normally attribute to AI, but in reality, Netflix and approached them and said, how would you like to merge? And they were like, no, we're good to go. And then Netflix, if you wanted to insert /AI, they were using digital cloud AI type things into their deliverables. So in reality, there's a really good example of a company that ignored what's happening, and we see where that led them. So the leadership of Blockbuster could have and should have seen over that next mountain or hurdle and embraced the technology.
Yeah, there's an interesting moment. We went through this when I was a group partner monitor group. When you really look at when things go wrong, is it that meeting between Blockbuster or Netflix, or was it something else? Is that when organizations' business models are overly reliant on non-core revenue to drive it. So I look, for example, at the ad agency industry. The big ad agencies have more value tied up in their buildings than in what they produce. That makes them very vulnerable to seismic shift. And I'm sure that at Blockbuster, they sat and said, wow, our big asset and our big liability is our buildings. If we go online, why would you want to have a building anymore? And it's that sense of disbalance between where the future business model is and where your current one is precariously lodged that invariably stops company doing this. I'll give you an example, actually, in the office cleaning business, which is really bizarre. So historically, right, big offices have crews that come in early in the morning, late at night, and they clean up, restrooms, trash cans, everything else, right? Well, imagine if you had, intelligent sensors in a trash can that said, hey, you don't need to clean me up. In fact, don't come over here because there's nobody in the side of the building for the last week and a half. You don't need to spend your time here. In fact, they actually tell you the specific trash cans that need to be cleaned up based on content volume, even potentially what the content is, and you end up having a crew possibly 4 times smaller than you've got.
Yeah.
Imagine if you could produce a vacuum cleaner that did most of the vacuuming in an office based on sort of programmable edges. You really wouldn't need the crew, and actually the equipment you use would be different as well. And I think organizations, when you look at these sectors, you go, what is going to radically change that we may need to pay attention to? And I think, again, that's the classic blockbuster error, with an inability to look at the changing world outside them, demographics, pay-as-you-go, everything else, and say, hey, it doesn't matter how much property we've got here, but we should make this marriage so fast with Netflix, they don't get out of the room before we've done the deal. But they couldn't because they were too orientated around property value, traditional retail metrics that just made no difference in the new world, as you said.
We could go on and on. I just think that was a really, really great explanation. Let's wrap up with this, Michael. We've had such a good, deep conversation here. What's the best way that anyone can reach out and pick up a copy of your book, reach out and learn more about your company and organization?
Yeah, so look, catch me on LinkedIn. I'm posting literally because of the Forbes podcast, Futures in Focus. We're interviewing everybody from, the CEO of Liverpool yesterday to, leading a microbiologist on the future of warfare. So catch me on LinkedIn. Grab me, Michael, at ink.digital, and I'm always more than happy to send out digital copies of books to people free. So if people would like a copy, grab me on Michael at ink.digital. And this has been a great conversation today, so I hope it inspires or maybe instructs people how just to take a breath and not make that blockbuster error.
Excellent. Well, Michael, thank you so much for your time today.
No, a pleasure. Take care.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneurssradio.com.